Look at, over the next couple of weeks, the 4 different types of market structures, and we're going to use those cost curves we talked about in the last chapter. Actually, I'll start going over those curves. Remember, so we have the average fixed cost. That's going to start off high and go low as we produce more units. Again, because this is a fixed cost and you're producing more units, it's going to go down over time. I've done that too high. So here we have average variable cost next, which goes down and then goes up again. This is showing you have the gains, increasing marginal productivity of labor. As you add more and more people to the same amount of capital, they're going to increase their productivity for a while. Then at a certain point, you're going to max that out. Just adding more people isn't going to be able to produce as much. So you're increasing your average variable cost each time. You have your average total cost, which is just the addition of those two, your fixed cost and your variable cost. And finally, let's draw this like that. Then you have your marginal cost. Marginal cost is more like the Nike swoosh instead of a U, and it's going to go through the minimum of the average variable cost and the average total cost. And as we look through firms and different types of markets in this section and the next couple sections, we're going to see how this marginal cost crossing these curves is going to determine where these firms are producing. All right, so jumping in the types of markets, perfectly competitive markets. So the 4 types of market structures we're going to look at. We'll begin with perfectly competitive markets. So in this case, there's what we call a ton of competition. There's a ton of different firms offering the same good at the same price. Then we'll look at monopolistically competitive firms. In this type of industry, we see a large number of firms again, so it's like perfect competition in that way. But we're also going to see some differentiation between the goods, and we'll see different prices. Monopolistic competition is the most common market we experience. But since perfectly competitive markets are easier to deal with theoretically, we'll start with that before moving on to the more realistic ones. Next is oligopolies. Oligopolies have a small number of firms, and there's differing levels of competition and differentiation of products between those, just depending on the industry. And finally, we have monopolies, where there's just one firm. Even though monopolies and perfectly competitive markets are rare, we have examples of each of these types in the real world, like even today. So when we look through these, we can see how firms in those types of markets behave. Odds are, if you go out, get a job in the business world, from here you'll be going into an oligopoly market or monopolistically competitive market. Here's just a basic breakdown of these. There's some examples of perfect competition. Again, competitive goods, very easy for a new company to start up. It'll be things like agricultural products are the easiest example. It's like growing wheat or raising poultry. There's going to be no difference between the types of goods offered in this market. Next is monopolistic competition. So you end up with differentiated products in this type of market, but it's still very easy for new companies to get in. So you have a lot of competition going on, a lot of new firms able to enter. And this is like clothing stores, restaurants, anything where if there's the same type of good, that there's different choices between different brands, and each one has different attributes and different reasons to buy it. The next is oligopoly. So again, goods can be either identical or they can be differentiated just based on the particulars of that industry. So this is things like computers and automobiles. There's not going to be a large number of producers there because there's high barriers to entry, really big fixed costs to get into these industries. So you very rarely see a new one starting up beginning to compete. And the last one is monopoly. They're going to have a unique product because literally no other company can sell those goods. And for some reason, entry is blocked. So one example is first-class mail delivery, like U.S. Postal Service. They're the only ones that are allowed to deliver letters in the U.S. That's because of the legal prohibition on competition. There was a funny story about this anarchist, Herbert Spencer, back in like the late 1800s. Who hated the government so much, he started his own postal service to compete against them. And he was like sending letters for like 1/8 of the cost and was still profiting. And he would mail them a letter every single day saying, hey, like, I'm competing against you illegally, you need to come in and shut me down. So we could take them to court and like make this big point. It was much harder to like go viral back then and like make the news. So we needed like a court case and like newspapers to cover it. Another example they give is providing tap water. So in this case, there's what they call a natural monopoly, where you just can't have multiple water authorities like within a city. Building all the infrastructure and things like that is too expensive and too difficult. So we end up with a monopoly just naturally occurring. Of the four, perfect competition is the least realistic and the least common. Monopoly is the next least common. And we mostly end up with monopolistic competition and oligopoly. So we're starting this chapter with perfect competition. So in this market, there's three characteristics that have to hold for it to be perfectly competitive. If not all three of these hold, then we cannot call it perfectly competitive. So first is that there's many buyers and sellers. So there's a ton of businesses, ton of producers that are making these goods. There's also a ton of buyers in the market. So what this means is that no one firm is able to affect the price. None of them are big enough. Whatever the market price is, they're going to have to accept it. And there's a ton of buyers in the market, a ton of consumers. So consumers aren't able to affect the price at all either. The next is that firms sell identical products. I don't mean like really similar products, like how all smartphones can do pretty much the same thing. I mean literally exactly the same. So like, the best example is agricultural products. It's mostly natural resources, things that come from like literally out of the earth. Very hard to differentiate those. So you end up with, wheat's basically the same. This is becoming less and less true with like genetically modified crops. And now we have people differentiating themselves, whether they're like GMOs, like they're, I don't know, bigger or tastier, or if you go with like the more natural products. So even in agriculture now, we're seeing some differentiation. But even things like coal, coal is coal. And the third one is that there's no barriers to entry for new firms entering the market. So it's very easy for new competitors to jump in and begin offering these products. It's going to make it very difficult for firms in the long run to profit because, again, if they're earning a profit, it's easy for another firm to see that and jump in and begin offering these goods. It also means that there's a lot of competition, so firms can't charge overly high prices above what the market price would be. Because if they did try to do that, there would be a bunch of other firms immediately entering and selling at a lower price. So a company would screw themselves by charging too high of a price. And the best part about competition is that you don't need new firms actually entering the market for competition to be useful, to make firms respond to consumer needs. You just need the threat of competition. So if you as a producer know that other firms can very easily begin selling that same good you are, even if they don't do it, just the fact that they could do it at any time and do it relatively easily means that you have to respond to consumer needs. You have to take their needs into account. Whereas if it was like an oligopoly, where it's very difficult for a new firm to enter, then you can get away with not meeting consumer needs because for someone to actually enter, it's going to cost them a lot of money to start up. It's going to take them a lot of time. So the first and the second condition, the many buyers and sellers and the identical products, imply that these firms in a perfectly competitive market are going to be what we call price takers. Because they can't affect the market price, they have to be willing to accept whatever the market price is. They're going to be very tiny relative to the entire market. So think of like thousands of farmers selling wheat, like in the US agricultural market. Because there's so many, one of them increasing production isn't going to do anything to price. Like I mentioned, these are very rare in the real world. They're held up as an ideal by economists, and it's a very simple model to work with. So because firms in a perfectly competitive market are too small to affect the market price, our demand curve is going to be flat at whatever that market price is. So here we have the demand curve for a wheat farmer. The market price in this market is $7. So if they try to sell above the market price, no one is going to be willing to buy their wheat. Why would you do that when you get the exact same wheat from literally anyone else in the country for $7? So they're going to be stuck at that $7. And they won't go below that because it makes no sense for them to sell below $7 when they can get that without doing anything to differentiate their product, without advertising, without having to do anything. They're guaranteed that 7, that's the most they can do, so that's where their demand curve is going to be. Again, this just shows whether they produce 6,000 bushels or 15,000 bushels, they're going to get that $7. Because we have this flat demand curve instead of a downward sloping demand curve, makes this model a lot easier to work with. Makes it very simple. Any questions so far? All right. So think of those three conditions for a perfectly competitive market. Can you answer me whether the following meet these criteria? How about restaurants? Do restaurants in general, would these be considered perfectly competitive? Would restaurants meet the first criteria, many buyers and sellers? Yeah, there's tons of restaurants out there. There's tons of people that go to restaurants. How about the second? Products are identical? No. No, so it's not a perfectly competitive market. Because there's some differentiation. You have choice between the restaurants, and which one you choose actually makes a difference. How about the electric scooter industry? So like Bird, Lime. Actually, the first time I used a Bird scooter was down in, where's Florida State? Tallahassee. I went down for the men's game last year because I have a friend that lives there, and it was pouring rain. It was like November, so there was like some leaves down. Hit a patch of leaves and just wiped out. Like something you'd see like, they those like the closed caption like security cameras, and you see like people wiping out or getting hit by cars or something. That'd have been one of those. So how about this industry? Are there many buyers and sellers? No, there's only a couple firms. How about the products? Are the products identical? Yeah, I'm talking about the ones you like rent and like, you pick up on the street.
That's pretty much the same. The price is there.
I've actually only ever ridden the Bird, so I don't know if there's any difference between the brands. And how about barriers to entry? Do you think there are a lot of barriers to entry in this industry?
Yeah. Start up cost, get your name out there. Develop an app.
Develop an app? That's not too expensive.
You could do some spread out all the vehicles, have a place to have someone pick them up and charge them each time. Just keep developing some bidding system for it. Yeah, that's some numbers and stuff across that.
How about legal barriers to entering that?
I'm not sure. Probably something. Might be liability.
Like initially there were like no barriers, but now like some cities were getting pissed off about it, but people just leave them laying around.
I mean, like, you probably need, like, contracts with, like, schools and stuff, put them on campus.
Yeah, that would be. And I'm sure that, you get that contract, you're exclusive, no one else can like enter that area.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's probably some barriers to entry. How about gasoline at a gas station?
Perfectly.
Maybe perfectly competitive?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've got many buyers and sellers, a lot of people that produce gasoline and sell gasoline, a lot of people that purchase it, tons of people have cars. The products are identical. But like 87 gas is the same everywhere.
Actually, I don't know about the barriers.
I don't think there's too many barriers to entry. You have to purchase like a new facility and like set it up. I don't think that's overly expensive. All right, how about airlines? There's a lot of airlines, but if you want to go from one city to another, how many airlines do you have the option to take? It's not quite like railroads, but you only have like one or two airlines usually. I think there's pretty high barriers to entry to actually buying new airplanes. Last example is shrimping in Forrest Gump.
At Chipotle, carne asada is back. The cumin, the coriander, mix it in with that fresh lime juice
Looks like
and
this
that
class is sponsored by
cilantro. It just
Chipotle,
brings
yeah.
out those flavors. It's very tender. When you're cutting it, it's tender. When you're eating it, it's tender. It's bomb steak.
I'll be expecting my check in the mail soon.
No shrimp.
Where's this god of yours?
It's funny Lieutenant Dan said that, because right then, God showed up. Now me, I was scared, but Lieutenant Dan, he was mad.
You call this a storm? Oh, you son of a... It's time for a showdown! You and me! I'm right here! Come and get me! You'll never see this bomb!
Hurricane Carmen came through here yesterday, destroying nearly everything in its path. And as in other towns up and down the coast, Biola Battery's entire shrimping industry has fallen victim to Carmen and has been left in utter ruin. Speaking with local officials, this reporter has learned, in fact, only one shrimping boat actually survived the storm.
Louise, that's fast.
After that, shrimping was easy. But since people still needed them shrimps for shrimp cocktails and barbecues and all, and we were the only boat left standing, Bubba Gump shrimp's what they got.
All right, so initially, what is that industry?
Oligopoly probably.
The oligopoly.
Very competition, because I imagine probably they do really quickly scale up the fishing industry is already set up.
There are definitely a lot of better ships out there.
Yeah.
But I mean, if Forrest and Lieutenant Dan could get a shrimping boat, couldn't be a too high barrier to entry, right? And shrimp are identical. How about after the storm?
Almost like a monopoly.
Yeah, now they're a monopoly. Probably didn't last too long. All those big companies able to buy new boats. And for that time, they've got literally zero competition. All right. So here we have a graph, supply and demand for the market for and supply and demand for an individual firm. Or I guess just demand for an individual firm. So on the left in the market, you have supply and demand crossing at $7. So the price of wheat in this market, equilibrium price, is going to be $7. And there's 2.25 trillion bushels of wheat per year sold in this market. You set up the individual farmer, the individual firm's demand curve right next to that with the same units. We trace that $7 across, and they have a flat demand curve at $7. So basically, the price is determined in equilibrium for the entire market, and then each firm within that market has a flat demand curve at that price. So if there's a shift in supply and demand in the market, that'll change the equilibrium price, and then the demand curve for each individual firm, or in this case farmer, will shift up or down to whatever that price is. And note the equilibrium quantity is like 2.25 trillion, way larger than the 15,000 bushels that this individual farmer is going to be selling in equilibrium. So the farmer is a very, very small market, or portion of this market. It's overall a very large market. All right. So now let's turn to how a firm actually maximizes profit in this perfectly competitive market. Where do they choose to produce, and how do they reach this decision? Third, profit is total revenue minus total cost. Everything left over after you've taken the revenue and then pay out all the costs of production, everything you're left with is a profit. Calculating revenue for a perfectly competitive firm is going to be very easy. The firm's going to receive the same amount of money for every single good it sells. In this case, no matter what, every single unit is going to be $7. So price is going to equal the average revenue, and that'll equal the marginal revenue. These are all going to be the same because they're all being sold at the same price, in this case, $7. So average revenue is going to be the total revenue divided by the quantity of the product sold. And marginal revenue is going to be the change in the total revenue from selling one more unit of that product. The additional revenue from one more sale. So the average revenue, if you want to compute that, it'll be, I have a formula for it. The average revenue equals total revenue divided by the quantity. The marginal revenue is going to equal the change in total revenue divided by the change in the quantity. And because marginal is for the next unit, usually this change in quantity is going to be 1. But it's important to remember it's the change in quantity, just in case we deal with something different in a situation. So we'll turn to an example for the next few slides. I had to edit these this morning, the next 2 slides, because basically you were supposed to produce at this one certain point, and they had the numbers slightly off in this example. So I wanted to make sure they lined up perfectly, just to make this more clear for you guys. So in our example, we have a farmer that's growing alfalfa. It's a very small farm, just so that we have very easy numbers to work with. So a farmer can produce anywhere from 0 to 10 bushels of alfalfa. And our market price in this market is going to be $7. So no matter how many units the farmer chooses to sell, the price of each unit is going to be $7. Yeah, this is going to be nice because it keeps the math very simple for these problems. So the total revenue, when there's 0 bushels being sold, is going to be 0. They're not bringing anything in. But then as we go on, we're going to add the $7 each time for each unit being sold. Our average revenue is going to be $7. So for instance, when we're producing 5 bushels of wheat, the total revenue is $35. So the $35 of total revenue divided by the 5 bushels of wheat is going to equal 7. In this case, the same as the market price. Likewise, the marginal revenue is going to be $7 because each time we're moving from 7 to 14 to 21, we're increasing by 7 as we sell 1 more bushel. So 7 divided by 1 is 7. So we see the price is equal to average revenue is equal to the marginal revenue. All right. So if we're going to look at the profit for a firm, in this case for this farmer, we're going to need to include more than just the revenue. We need to look at the cost side as well. So we'll look at the total cost in this table. In this case, the total cost is just given to us. So it's not being calculated for anything in the market. It's just there so we can figure out what a profit will be. In this case, they're totally made up. And I changed a couple of these. The math for some of these last 3 might not work out perfectly. So I was doing this in the very last second. But we have the profit equal total revenue minus total cost. So in this case, the farmer has $10 in fixed cost. So when they're producing no bushels of alfalfa, they end up with a negative profit, negative $10. They're earning a loss. When they produce that first unit, total revenue is $7. Their total cost is $14. So again, they're still going to be losing money, but this time they're only losing $7. When they produce 2 units, they're going to lose $2.50. So they're getting better, but they're still losing money. Finally, when they produce 3 bushels of wheat, they'll be earning a slight profit of $2.50. As they increase the bushels, they're slowly increasing their profit. By the time they produce 6 and 7 bushels, they end up with a profit of $13. And then from there, they start going down again. The marginal production of labor ends up decreasing. You see these diminishing returns. So they earn a lower profit. The variable costs are getting too high relative to what they're producing. And eventually, at the 10th unit, they end up earning a loss again because their costs are now much higher. So early on, in those initial 6 units, we see economies of scale. As a farmer is producing more and they're getting larger, hiring more workers, whatever, they're increasing their profits. But eventually, that's going to stall out. Their profits are going to fall and then eventually go negative, become a loss. So we see diseconomies of scale. So now we can also calculate the marginal revenue and marginal costs for the firm. You see here a marginal cost initially is fairly high at $4 and then drops down and then slowly increases up again, eventually reaching $15. Marginal revenue the whole time is staying $7. Now note where the firm this is what happens when you do things at the last second. When the firm is maximizing the profit, marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So firm is going to maximize their profit by producing as long as their marginal revenue is greater than their marginal cost, all the way up until marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Now in the initial example, like initial PowerPoint slides, these numbers are slightly different and marginal cost was $6.50 here. I wanted to be very clear for you guys because these firms want to produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Sometimes you can't reach that and it's slightly off, but I want to hammer that home, that you produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. At that point, you're going to be maximizing your profit. So at this 8 unit, well, look at unit 5. Marginal revenue is $7. Marginal cost is $3.50. So if they produce one additional bushel of wheat, move from 5 units to 6 units, the revenue they're going to gain is $7. But the cost to them of that next unit is only going to be $4.50. So because they'll earn more money by producing that next unit, they'll go from producing 5 units to 6 units. When they get to 7 units, that next unit of output, that 7th unit is going to be $7 of revenue, the marginal revenue. The marginal cost, the cost of that next unit is also $7. So they'll produce that one as well. But once they hit 7, they're not going to go on. They produce an 8th unit, they have a marginal revenue of $7, but the marginal cost is going to be $8, or $8.50. So if they produce that 8th unit, they're going to be spending more money on producing it than they can get back for it. So in this case, they're obviously not going to want to do that. And they know what they're doing and have like an understanding of their cost. They'll know that they're going to lose money on that last unit, so they're not going to produce it. So they're going to stop where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. In this case, it's 7 units. I'm going to stop and say that again, just because of how many people tend to forget this by the final. The firm will produce until marginal revenue equals marginal cost. I want you guys to remember that. And they're going to do that in perfect competition and in monopolistic competition. So we can also use a graph to show this. And using the graph, we can determine what level of production is going to maximize the profit. Just looking at marginal revenue and marginal cost. So marginal revenue is constant. Again, remember the marginal revenue curve equals the demand curve equals the price. So at this $7, we have this horizontal line again. The firm's going to maximize profit or marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So we trace out this marginal cost curve. Where these two cross is where the firm is going to produce to maximize their profit. This is using the same numbers as before, so it's going to be at 7 units where these cross. This is the old graph. I couldn't change this in time, so they like almost touch. But for these numbers, we're looking at most graphs. It'll be much easier when we're looking at firms that produce more than just 10 units. When they're producing hundreds, you're far more likely to have it match up. Here we have $7 for the price. Marginal revenue equals demand. And we have marginal cost. So we're going to cross each other right there at 7 units. So that's where a firm wants to produce. That's where they've made themselves as well off as possible. And remember, this isn't just something that will happen in theory. This is something that actually happens in practice. They don't consider like these curves. This is just how we represent them when we're trying to look at their decision making. But firms are made on the margin. So this farmer is going to decide, should I produce, or should I decide to plant this next bushel of crops? What is this? This is alfalfa. Should I plant this next bushel's worth of alfalfa? It's not all or nothing choices. So you consider each one the next one. Is the revenue going to be worth the cost? And you think of that each time. So the cost of the labor involved in harvesting and selling this alfalfa is going to be higher than the revenue received from selling it, then the farmer's not going to do it. That would be up here on the marginal cost curve. Marginal cost is down here. At this point right here, it's like, I don't know, $5.50. The cost right there is below the marginal revenue. So of course you're going to produce more. You're going to keep producing until you hit that. And you're not going to produce up here at, say, $10. Again, the cost of doing so is going to exceed any benefit you get from it. Not worth it to do that. So, the rules we just talked about, to lay them out for you guys. The profit maximizing level of output is where the difference between the total revenue and total cost is greatest. There's a little figure in your textbook. It's not included in the slides that have like a figure for that. So you have like total cost and total revenue. And this is money, so either the price of the good or the cost of production. This is the quantity of goods. At some point, they're right here. The difference between the two curves is the largest. This is graphical representation of that slide we did earlier from the beginning. Profit is greatest with a difference between them. So the difference between the revenue and the cost is the profit. So the difference is, by definition, the profit. That's going to be, in this case, let's call it the same market. There'll be 7 units. So profit maximizing level of output is where the difference between the total revenue and the total cost is greatest. By definition, that's a profit. And it's going to be where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. And these are going to be true for every single firm. This is where each firm is going to be able to maximize profits. Now, these aren't going to hold for oligopoly. Well, we're not going to use these cost curves to understand oligopoly. But their profit maximizing level of output is going to follow these rules. And for perfectly competitive firms, because the price equals the marginal revenue, the profit maximizing level of output is going to be where the price equals the marginal cost. And that's just because the price here equals the marginal revenue equals the demand. We're not going to see that in other markets. But in perfectly competitive, this is going to be the case. All right, I'm not going to be in a new section with 5 minutes left on Friday. So you guys have any questions? All right, if not, have a good week.